The morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured gardens of Windsor Castle as 8-year-old Prince George walked alongside his protection officer, Detective Sergeant James Mitchell. It was a crisp October day in 2021, and the young prince had insisted on taking his usual route through the palace grounds before his morning lessons. What neither of them knew was that this ordinary Tuesday would become a story whispered through the corridors of royal residences for years to come. Detective Sergeant Mitchell had been assigned to the young prince's security detail only 3 months earlier. A 20-year veteran of the Metropolitan Police, Mitchell had worked with celebrities, politicians, and even other members of the royal family. But there was something different about this assignment. Prince George wasn't like the other high-profile individuals he'd protected. The boy was genuinely curious about everyone around him, from the gardeners to the kitchen staff, and he had a way of making people feel seen and valued. As they rounded the corner near the East Terrace, Prince George suddenly stopped walking. His attention had been caught by something that made Detective Sergeant Mitchell's professional instincts kick in immediately, but it wasn't a security threat that had captured the young prince's attention. It was Corporal Sarah Williams, a member of the Queen's Guard, standing at her post near the castle's main entrance. Even from a distance, it was clear that something was wrong. Corporal Williams, usually the picture of military precision, was struggling to maintain her composure. Her shoulders trembled slightly beneath her iconic red tunic, and though her face remained forward-facing as required by protocol, tears were streaming down her cheeks. The young prince noticed what many adults might have missed or chosen to ignore. "Detective Sergeant Mitchell," Prince George said quietly, using the formal address he'd been taught. "That lady looks very sad. Is she allowed to be sad while she's working?" Mitchell glanced toward the guardsman and immediately recognized the signs of someone fighting an internal battle. In his years of security work, he'd seen people struggle with personal crises while trying to maintain their professional duties. It was never easy, but for a member of the Queen's Guard, showing emotion while on duty was particularly challenging given the strict protocols they followed. "Well, Your Highness," Mitchell replied carefully. "Sometimes people have difficult days even when they're at work. The guards are trained to stay focused on their duties, but they're still human beings with feelings." Prince George considered this explanation seriously. At 8 years old, he already understood more about duty and responsibility than most children his age. But he also possessed an innate empathy that seemed to transcend royal protocol. He watched Corporal Williams for another moment, noting how she was trying so hard to fulfill her obligations despite her obvious distress. "Can we go talk to her?" the prince asked. "Maybe she needs a friend." Detective Sergeant Mitchell felt a moment of uncertainty. Royal protocol was clear about maintaining appropriate boundaries, and members of the Queen's Guard were specifically trained not to engage in casual conversation while on duty. But there was something in the young prince's voice, a genuine concern that seemed to override traditional considerations. "We can certainly check if she's all right," Mitchell agreed, making a decision that would later prove to be exactly the right one. As they approached Corporal Williams, Prince George's steps became more purposeful. He'd been raised to understand the importance of the Queen's Guard and the dedication they showed to protecting his family. These weren't just uniformed figures to him. They were real people who made sacrifices to serve the crown. When they were close enough to speak, Prince George stopped directly in front of Corporal Williams. She maintained her forward gaze as required. But he could see her struggling even more now that someone was nearby. The young prince stood there quietly for a moment, as if gathering his thoughts. "Excuse me," he said softly, using the polite tone his parents had instilled in him. "I'm Prince George, and I noticed you look upset. Are you okay?" For a moment, Corporal Williams seemed frozen between her duty to maintain protocol and her surprise at being addressed so directly by the young prince. She'd been dealing with devastating news from home that morning. Her younger brother, serving in Afghanistan, had been injured in an incident, and she'd received the call just an hour before her shift began. Military discipline had carried her through the start of her duty, but the weight of worry and fear had been building with each passing minute. "Your Highness?" she managed to say, her voice slightly strained. I'm quite all right. Thank you for asking." But Prince George had inherited more than just royal titles from his lineage. He possessed an emotional intelligence that allowed him to see through polite facades. He could tell that Corporal Williams was anything but all right, and something in her voice told him that she needed more than just a passing inquiry. "You don't look all right," he said gently, without any hint of accusation or judgment. "My mummy says it's okay to be sad sometimes. She says talking about what makes us sad can help make it better." Detective Sergeant Mitchell watched this exchange with growing amazement. In his years of protection work, he'd seen many interactions between royals and their staff, but this was different. There was no condescension, no sense of duty-bound politeness. This was one human being reaching out to another with genuine care and concern. Corporal Williams felt something break inside her chest. The combination of the young prince's unexpected kindness and her own overwhelming worry created a moment of vulnerability she hadn't anticipated. Despite her training, despite the protocols she'd memorized, despite everything she'd been taught about maintaining professional distance, she found herself responding to this 8-year-old boy as if he were simply a concerned friend. "My brother is far away," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's a soldier too, and he got hurt today. I found out this morning, and I've been trying not to think about it, but—" Her voice trailed off as she struggled to maintain her composure. Prince George listened with the kind of focused attention that adults often failed to give each other. He understood that this lady was scared for someone she loved, and that understanding seemed to guide his next words. "Is your brother brave like you?" he asked. "I bet he is. And I bet he's going to be okay because brave people are strong." The simplicity of his words, combined with the absolute sincerity with which he delivered them, had an effect that no amount of official sympathy could have achieved. Corporal Williams felt a small spark of comfort penetrate her anxiety. Here was this young prince, who could have been anywhere doing anything, taking time to care about her personal struggles. "He is brave," she agreed, managing a small smile despite her tears. "Very brave." Prince George nodded seriously, as if this confirmed something important. "Then he'll be all right. And you're brave, too, standing here protecting everyone even when you're worried. That's what brave people do." What happened next surprised everyone, including Detective Sergeant Mitchell. Prince George reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small toy soldier, painted in the traditional red uniform of the Queen's Guard. It was one of his favorite possessions, a gift from his grandfather that he carried with him often. "Would you like to keep this?" he offered, holding the tiny figure out to Corporal Williams. "My grandpa gave it to me, and he said it would always keep me safe. Maybe it can help keep your brother safe, too." The gesture was so unexpected, so pure in its intention, that Corporal Williams found herself accepting the small gift before she could think about protocol or appropriateness. The toy soldier felt warm in her palm, and somehow, impossibly, she did feel a little less alone with her worry. "Thank you, Your Highness," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "This means more than you know." Prince George smiled, satisfied that he'd been able to help in some small way. "Will you tell me if your brother gets better?" he asked. "Detective Sergeant Mitchell knows how to find me." "I will," Corporal Williams promised, clutching the small soldier. "I absolutely will." As Prince George and Detective Sergeant Mitchell continued on their walk, neither of them spoke for several minutes. The detective was processing what he'd just witnessed, trying to reconcile it with his previous experiences of royal interactions. This hadn't been a staged photo opportunity or a carefully orchestrated public relations moment. It had been genuine human compassion from a child who could have easily walked past without a second thought. "That was a very kind thing you did," Mitchell finally said. Prince George shrugged, as if the gesture had been the most natural thing in the world. "She looked sad, and nobody should be sad alone. My mummy taught me that." The detective made a mental note to include this incident in his report, though he wondered how he could possibly capture the true significance of what had just occurred. How do you document the moment when an 8-year-old boy demonstrates the kind of leadership and empathy that many adults never achieve? As they reached the entrance to the castle's education wing, where Prince George would spend the next few hours in lessons, the young prince paused one more time. "Detective Sergeant Mitchell, do you think all the guards know that we care about them? Not just because they protect us, but because they're people?" The question hung in the air, profound in its simplicity. Mitchell realized that this young boy understood something fundamental about leadership that many people in positions of power never grasped. True authority came not from demanding respect, but from showing genuine care for those around you. "I think after today, they'll know a little better," Mitchell replied. Prince George nodded, satisfied with this answer, and headed into the castle for his morning mathematics lesson. But the ripples of his simple act of kindness were just beginning to spread through the ancient walls of Windsor Castle, carrying with them a message that would touch hearts and change perspectives in ways that no one could have predicted. News traveled fast within the walls of Windsor Castle, but it usually concerned official state business, security protocols, or formal ceremonies. What happened that Tuesday morning was different. By lunchtime, word of Prince George's encounter with Corporal Williams had reached the ears of Captain Elizabeth Hartwell, the commanding officer of the Queen's Guard Regiment stationed at the castle. Captain Hartwell had served in the military for 15 years, rising through the ranks to achieve her current position through dedication, skill, and unwavering commitment to duty. She'd seen many interactions between members of the royal family and her guards over the years, most of them brief and formal. What Detective Sergeant Mitchell described to her in his afternoon briefing was unprecedented. "He gave her his toy soldier?" Captain Hartwell asked, wanting to make sure she'd heard correctly. "His grandfather's gift," Mitchell confirmed, without hesitation, and he asked her to let him know how her brother was doing. "It wasn't performative, Captain. It was genuine concern from a child who noticed someone in pain." Captain Hartwell sat back in her chair, processing this information. She'd been dealing with her own concerns about Corporal Williams that morning. The young guardsman had requested to remain on duty, despite receiving difficult personal news, and while her dedication was admirable, Hartwell had been worried about her emotional state. Military training prepared soldiers for many things, but standing motionless for hours while dealing with family crises was a particular kind of challenge. "How is Williams now?" she asked. "Much better, actually," Mitchell replied. "It's remarkable what that simple interaction did for her morale. She's been carrying that toy soldier with her, and I think it's giving her something to hold on to." Later that afternoon, Captain Hartwell made an unusual decision. She called for a brief meeting with her senior staff to discuss what had occurred. In the military, such meetings typically focused on security protocols, training schedules, or operational concerns. This gathering had a different purpose entirely. "What happened this morning has given me cause to reflect," Captain Hartwell began, addressing Sergeant Major Thompson and the other senior officers. "We spend so much time thinking about protecting the royal family that we sometimes forget they're also people who care about protecting us in their own way." Sergeant Major Thompson, a gruff veteran with 25 years of service, shifted uncomfortably. "Ma'am, are you referring to the young prince's conversation with Williams?" "I am," Captain Hartwell confirmed. "That 8-year-old boy showed more emotional intelligence and leadership in 5 minutes than many commanders demonstrate in their entire careers. He saw one of our people in distress and responded with immediate compassion. The room fell quiet as the officers considered this perspective. They'd all been trained to maintain professional distance, to see their role as protectors rather than individuals deserving of protection themselves. The idea that a member of the royal family might view them as people worthy of personal concern was both touching and somewhat overwhelming. "It makes you think differently about what we're doing here," admitted Lieutenant Colonel Barnes, who'd been with the Queen's Guard for over a decade. "We're not just uniformed fixtures. We're part of something larger, something that includes mutual respect and care." Meanwhile, Corporal Williams was experiencing her own transformation. The small toy soldier had become a tangible reminder that someone cared about her well-being, but more than that, it had shifted her entire perspective on her role at the castle. She'd always taken pride in her service, but now she felt connected to something more personal and meaningful. During her afternoon break, she'd received an update about her brother's condition. The initial reports had been worse than reality, and while he would need time to recover, his injuries weren't life-threatening. The relief she felt was enormous, but she found herself thinking about Prince George's words. His simple confidence that brave people were strong had somehow made the waiting easier to bear. "You look different," observed Corporal James Peterson, her fellow guardsman, as they prepared for the evening shift change. "I mean better, more relaxed." Williams smiled, touching the small soldier in her pocket. "I had an interesting conversation today. Made me realize that what we do here matters to them in ways I hadn't really considered before." "The royals? You mean?" "Specifically Prince George. He saw that I was upset about my brother and took time to talk to me. Really talk to me, not just polite acknowledgement. He gave me something of his to help me feel better." Peterson looked skeptical. "An 8-year-old did that?" "An 8-year-old who's being raised to understand that leadership means caring about the people around you," Williams corrected. "It was remarkable, James. He made me feel like my problems mattered to him personally." Word of the incident continued to spread, not through official channels, but through the informal networks that exist in any close-knit community. Kitchen staff, gardeners, housekeeping personnel, and security officers all heard versions of the story. Each retelling seemed to add a layer of warmth to the castle's atmosphere. Mrs. Margaret Foster, head of housekeeping at Windsor Castle, had worked there for over 20 years. She'd seen many changes in staff, protocols, and family dynamics during her tenure. When she heard about Prince George's gesture from one of the cleaning staff, it reminded her of something she'd witnessed the previous month. "It doesn't surprise me," she told her assistant, Mrs. Patricia Clark, as they organized supplies in the linen closet. "I saw him thank one of the new maids for her work last month. Not just a quick acknowledgement, but he actually stopped to tell her she was doing a good job. The girl was so moved she nearly cried." "That's unusual for someone so young," Mrs. Clark observed. "His parents are raising him right," Mrs. Foster agreed. "They're teaching him that being royal doesn't mean being separate from people. It means being responsible for their well-being." The story reached the ears of Detective Chief Inspector Robert Hayes, the senior security coordinator for Windsor Castle. Hayes had been working royal protection for 8 years and had developed a deep appreciation for the complexities of balancing accessibility with safety. What he heard about Prince George's interaction intrigued him professionally and personally. That evening, Hayes requested a meeting with Detective Sergeant Mitchell. He wanted to understand the security implications of what had occurred, but he also wanted to hear firsthand about the human dynamics he'd observed. "From a protection standpoint, how do you assess what happened?" Hayes asked, as they sat in the security office reviewing the day's reports. Mitchell considered the question carefully. "There was no security risk, sir. If anything, what the prince did probably strengthened our overall security posture by building positive relationships with the personnel around him. People protect what they feel connected to." "And from a human standpoint?" "It was extraordinary," Mitchell admitted. I've worked with politicians, celebrities, business leaders. I've seen people try to project empathy for cameras or political gain. This was completely different. This was a child responding instinctively to someone else's pain, with genuine kindness. Hayes nodded thoughtfully. It speaks well of his upbringing, and it suggests that future security considerations might need to account for a royal who actively engages with staff rather than maintaining traditional distance. Is that a problem? On the contrary, Hayes replied. It might be exactly what the monarchy needs. Connection builds loyalty in ways that protocol alone never could. The next morning brought an unexpected development. Corporal Williams had received word that her brother was being transferred to a medical facility in Germany for treatment, with an excellent prognosis for full recovery. She'd promised Prince George she would update him on her brother's condition, and she was determined to keep that promise. Through Detective Sergeant Mitchell, she sent word that she had good news to share. The prince, who was having breakfast with his siblings and parents, immediately asked if he could speak with her briefly before his morning lessons. The meeting was arranged in one of the castle's smaller reception rooms, with Detective Sergeant Mitchell and Captain Heartfelt present. When Prince George entered the room, Corporal Williams stood at attention, but the prince quickly gestured for her to relax. "How is your brother?" he asked immediately, his face showing genuine concern. "He's going to be all right, Your Highness," Williams replied, her voice bright with relief. "He's being moved to a better hospital, and the doctors say he'll make a full recovery. I wanted to thank you for yesterday. Your kindness helped me get through the worst of it." Prince George's face lit up with genuine happiness. "I'm so glad he's okay. I knew he would be because you're both brave." Williams reached into her pocket and pulled out the small toy soldier. "I wanted to return this to you, Your Highness. It brought me luck, but I think it belongs with you." Prince George shook his head firmly. "It's yours now. Besides, maybe you'll need it again sometime, or maybe you can give it to someone else who needs luck. That's what my grandpa would want." The generosity of the gesture and the wisdom behind it struck everyone in the room. This 8-year-old boy had just articulated a philosophy of paying kindness forward that many adults struggled to grasp. "Thank you, Your Highness," Williams said, clutching the soldier. "I'll remember this always." As the meeting concluded and Prince George headed off to his lessons, Captain Heartfelt found herself walking back to her office with a completely new perspective on her role at the castle. The Queen's Guard weren't just protectors. They were part of a community where care flowed in both directions. That afternoon, she made another unusual decision. She called together the entire regiment for what she termed a morale and mission briefing. Standing before her assembled guards, she shared the story of Prince George's kindness, though she was careful to focus on its significance rather than the specific details. "Yesterday, we received a powerful reminder of why we serve," she began. "It's not just about protecting buildings or following protocols. We're part of something larger, something that includes mutual respect and genuine care for one another's well-being." Sergeant Major Thompson, who'd initially been skeptical about discussing personal interactions during official briefings, found himself moved by the captain's words. "Ma'am, if I may, it seems like the young prince is being raised to understand leadership differently than we might expect." "Exactly," Captain Heartfelt agreed. "And that gives me great hope for the future of the institution we serve. Leadership that includes genuine compassion is leadership worth following." The briefing concluded with a renewed sense of purpose among the guards. They'd always taken pride in their service, but now they felt part of something more personal and meaningful. The ancient walls of Windsor Castle seemed to hold not just tradition and protocol, but genuine human connection. As the evening shift took their positions around the castle, there was a subtle but noticeable change in the atmosphere. Guards stood with the same professional precision they'd always maintained. But there was something warmer in their bearing, something that suggested they felt valued, not just as protectors, but as individuals worthy of care and concern. Corporal Williams took her evening post with the small toy soldier secure in her pocket, but more importantly, with a story that would stay with her for the rest of her life. She'd experienced firsthand what it meant to serve under leadership that valued her as a person, not just a uniform. It was a lesson that would influence how she treated others for years to come. 3 weeks after the incident with Corporal Williams, Windsor Castle hosted a routine ceremonial changing of the guard that would normally have proceeded without any unusual occurrences. However, the atmosphere surrounding royal interactions had subtly shifted since Prince George's act of kindness had rippled through the castle community. Prince William and Catherine had noticed changes in their son's behavior following his encounter with the troubled guardsman. He'd begun asking more questions about the people who worked around them, showing increased interest in their well-being and personal circumstances. During family dinners, he would share observations about staff members he'd encountered, demonstrating a growing awareness of the individuals behind the uniforms and roles. "He asked me yesterday if Mrs. Morrison in the kitchen had grandchildren," Catherine mentioned to William as they watched their children play in the garden. "When I said yes, he wanted to know if they lived far away and if she missed them when she was working." William smiled, recognizing something of his own mother's empathy in his son's growing consciousness. Diana would have loved seeing this development in him. She always believed that genuine care for others was the most important quality a future king could possess. The couple had made a decision to encourage this natural inclination, while ensuring their son understood the appropriate boundaries and responsibilities that came with his position. They'd begun incorporating more discussions about service and leadership into his education, focusing not just on protocol and duty, but on the human dimensions of royal responsibility. Detective Sergeant Mitchell had become an unexpected witness to this evolution. During their daily walks around the castle grounds, Prince George had begun asking detailed questions about the various staff members they encountered. He wanted to know about their families, their backgrounds, their interests beyond their work roles. "Does Mr. Patterson, who tends the roses, have children?" the prince asked during one of their morning walks, referring to the head gardener they'd passed earlier. "He does," Mitchell replied. "2 daughters, both grown up now with families of their own." Prince George considered this information seriously. "He must be proud of them and probably misses them when they don't visit." These conversations had become a regular part of their routine, and Mitchell found himself gathering information about staff members not for security purposes, but to satisfy the young prince's genuine curiosity about the people around him. It was unusual, but it was also heartwarming to see a child developing such authentic interest in others' lives. Meanwhile, the story of Prince George's kindness had reached beyond the immediate Windsor Castle community. Captain Hartwell had included a carefully worded report about the incident in her monthly briefing to senior Royal Protection coordinators. The report focused on the positive impact on guard morale and the strengthening of security relationships, but it also highlighted the young prince's emerging leadership qualities. Commander Sarah Elizabeth, head of Royal Protection Services, read the report with great interest. She'd been working royal security for 12 years and had observed many interactions between family members and their protection details. What struck her about this particular incident was its spontaneous nature and lasting impact. "This suggests we might need to adjust our protocols to accommodate a more engaged style of royal interaction," she discussed with her deputy during their weekly briefing. "If Prince George continues developing this level of personal engagement with staff, we should support that while maintaining appropriate security measures." The ripple effects of that Tuesday morning encounter continued to spread in ways that surprised everyone involved. Corporal Williams had shared the story with her family during a video call, emphasizing not just the prince's kindness, but what it revealed about his character and upbringing. Her brother, recovering well in Germany, had been particularly moved by the gesture. "A future king gave you his toy soldier?" he'd asked during their conversation, his voice filled with amazement. "That's incredible, Sarah. It shows he really understood what you were going through." Williams had framed the story carefully when sharing it, focusing on the human connection rather than any breach of protocol. She understood the importance of discretion in her role, but she also felt that the prince's kindness deserved to be recognized and remembered. The story had also reached the ears of other staff members throughout the royal household network. Housekeeping staff, kitchen personnel, gardeners, and security officers at various royal residences had heard versions of the tale. Each retelling seemed to reinforce a growing sense that this young prince was being raised with values that prioritized human connection alongside royal duty. Mrs. Foster, the head of housekeeping, had noticed concrete changes in staff morale and attitude following the incident. During her weekly staff meeting, she'd addressed the impact indirectly. "I've noticed an improvement in everyone's spirits lately," she'd told her team. "There seems to be a renewed sense of purpose in our work. We're not just maintaining a building, we're supporting a family that genuinely cares about our well-being." One of the younger housekeeping staff, Emily Rodriguez, had been particularly affected by hearing about the prince's gesture. She'd only been working at the castle for 6 months and had sometimes felt intimidated by the formal atmosphere and strict protocols. Learning that an 8-year-old prince had shown such personal concern for a staff member made her feel more connected to her role. "It makes you want to do your best work," she confided to her colleague during their break. "Not because you're afraid of making mistakes, but because you feel like you're part of something important, something where people actually care about each other." The incident had also prompted reflection among the senior staff who'd been at the castle for many years. Thomas Brighton, the deputy head of security, had worked royal protection for 15 years. He'd seen many changes in royal family dynamics and public expectations during that time. "What's remarkable," he shared with Detective Chief Inspector Hayes during their weekly review, "is how this one simple act of kindness has affected everyone's perspective on their work. People feel more valued, more connected to the mission." Hayes agreed. "It demonstrates something important about leadership. Genuine care for others creates loyalty and dedication that protocols alone can't achieve." As autumn progressed into winter, the effects of Prince George's compassionate gesture continued to influence the castle community in subtle but meaningful ways. Staff members began looking out for each other more actively, offering support during difficult times and celebrating each other's successes. Captain Hartwell noticed that guard morale had reached levels she hadn't seen in her years of command. Sick days had decreased, performance reviews had improved, and there was a general sense of camaraderie that enhanced the regiment's effectiveness. "It's amazing what feeling valued as individuals rather than just as uniformed personnel has done for my guards," she reflected in a conversation with Detective Sergeant Mitchell. "They're more alert, more dedicated, and more willing to go above and beyond in their duties." The most significant development came in early December, when Prince George approached his parents with an idea that surprised them with its thoughtfulness and maturity. "I've been thinking," he told William and Catherine during one of their evening conversations, "about all the people who work to help our family. They do important jobs, and they have families and worries just like we do." Catherine encouraged him to continue. "What are you thinking about specifically?" "Well, Christmas is coming, and I know we give gifts to the staff, but I was wondering if we could do something more personal. Maybe we could learn about their families and their interests so our gifts show that we really know them as people." William and Catherine exchanged glances, both moved by their son's developing empathy and social awareness. This wasn't about following tradition or protocol. It was about genuine human connection. "That's a wonderful idea," William said. "How would you like to go about learning more about everyone?" Prince George had clearly thought this through. "Maybe Detective Sergeant Mitchell could help me. He knows lots of the staff, and he could tell me about their families and what they like to do. Then we could choose gifts that show we pay attention to them as people, not just as workers." The proposal was both touching and practical. It demonstrated that the young prince had internalized the lesson from his encounter with Corporal Williams, understanding that genuine care required knowledge and attention to individual circumstances. Over the following weeks, with Detective Sergeant Mitchell's help, Prince George embarked on what became an informal but thorough study of the castle staff's personal lives and interests. He learned that Mrs. Morrison in the kitchen had grandchildren who loved to paint, that Mr. Patterson the gardener was interested in ornithology, that several of the guards had young families they rarely got to see due to their demanding schedules. The Christmas gift selection process became a collaborative effort involving the entire family, with Prince George leading the research and making suggestions based on his growing knowledge of each staff member's personality and circumstances. The gifts that year were notably more personal and thoughtful than in previous years, reflecting genuine attention to individual preferences and needs. When Corporal Williams opened her gift, she found a beautiful leather journal embossed with her initials, along with a note from Prince George thanking her for her service and encouraging her to write letters to her brother during his continued recovery. The thoughtfulness of the gesture brought tears to her eyes. "He remembered everything about our conversation," she told Captain Hartwell later. "Not just the fact that I was worried about my brother, but specific details about their relationship and what might help me stay connected with him." The Christmas celebration that year had an atmosphere of genuine warmth and connection that many long-term staff members said they'd never experienced before. The young prince had somehow managed to transform the traditional gift-giving from a formal obligation into an expression of authentic care and appreciation. As the holiday season concluded and the castle settled into its winter routine, Detective Sergeant Mitchell found himself reflecting on the remarkable transformation he'd witnessed. A simple act of childhood kindness had evolved into something much larger, creating a community culture where people felt valued as individuals and motivated to support each other. "You know," he told Prince George during one of their January walks, "what you did for Corporal Williams that day has changed how everyone here thinks about their work and their relationships with each other." Prince George looked thoughtful. "I just didn't want her to be sad alone. But I'm glad it helped other people too." The simplicity of his motivation, combined with the profound impact of his actions, perfectly captured what many would come to see as the defining characteristic of his emerging leadership style. Prince George was learning that true authority came not from demanding respect or maintaining distance, but from showing genuine care for others and creating environments where people felt valued and connected. As they completed their walk and headed back toward the castle for the prince's morning lessons, Detective Sergeant Mitchell realized he was witnessing the early development of a future king who understood something essential about leadership that many never learned. The small toy soldier that had started this journey of compassion was still in Corporal Williams's possession, but its true gift had been the example it represented of how small acts of kindness could create lasting change. The guard who had once felt isolated in her worry now stood her posts with renewed purpose, part of a community where her well-being mattered to those she protected. And the young prince continued his education, learning not just about protocol and duty, but about the power of human connection to transform hearts, strengthen loyalty, and create the kind of leadership that inspires rather than merely commands. The quiet kindness that had stilled the palace that October morning had become a living example of how authentic care for others could transform not just individual relationships, but entire communities. It was a lesson that would stay with everyone involved for the rest of their lives, proof that sometimes the smallest gestures carry the greatest power to change the world.